in Nigeria, where the United Nations has temporarily suspended aid deliveries to the northeastern state of Borno. A humanitarian convoy has been attacked in the former Boko Haram stronghold. The UN says known assailants attacked the convoy as it was returning to Maiduguri after delivering aid to the town of Bama. At least 2 staff members have been injured. Nearly 250,000 children in Borno are malnourished. UN Children's Agency UNICEF says at least 1 in every 5 children will die if they don't receive treatment. However, all humanitarian assistance is suspended pending review of the security situation. Let's now get more details and perspectives on this story from CCTV's Deji Badmas, who's following developments from Lagos, and our UN correspondent Lona Shadik, who joins us tonight from our Washington, D.C. studios. Deji, do we now have a complete picture on the full scale of that ambush in terms of casualty numbers and how it was executed?
Well, you're quite right, Penina. The army has actually issued a statement, and in that statement it says this attack happened after the convoy, I'm talking about the UN convoy now, had actually finished their delivery on that day, and that it was actually on their way back, and that the attack happened in a village called Malnourished, which is outside of Bama, of course, and that as they were just approaching the village, Boko Haram insurgents, opened fire on them. And of course, the military soldiers that escorted the convoy now responded. And what we are told is that the soldiers engaged these Boko Haram insurgents in hot pursuit up to a setting village, and then they returned and before evacuating the wounded to the hospital in Maiduguri. Now, the wounded, we understand, are in the University College Hospital in Maiduguri, and that their injury is not life-threatening at all. As a matter of fact, the Chief of Army Staff has actually gone to visit them and has given all the assurance that the Nigerian Army will continue to maintain security and ensure the safety now of both civilians and combatants in that area.
Lona, UNICEF has painted quite a grim picture of the humanitarian situation in northeastern Nigeria. Any reaction from the UN so far on the suspension of relief efforts?
Well, UNICEF has put out a statement, and they have said that these are unknown attackers. They're not in a position to comment on who exactly carried out this attack. But we do know, of course, that UNICEF worker and a contractor for the IOM were injured, and that is what's led to this temporary suspension. But the UN has said this is not only an attack on humanitarian workers. They've said it's an attack on the people who most need the assistance and aid these workers were bringing. And as you say, they certainly do need that assistance and aid. The UN has painted a very grim picture of the situation in northern Nigeria. Nearly 250,000 children, they say, are suffering from life-threatening malnutrition, and around 1 in 5, in fact, they say, will die if they don't get food and help soon. And that is something, in fact, that the medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières has also been underlining in recent days. They say food supplies are close to running out in the area now, and malnourished children are dying in large numbers already. In fact, they spoke about 15,000 people in one town, Banki, who've been isolated by Boko Haram violence and depend entirely on humanitarian aid. So the suspension of these kind of convoys is very bad news indeed for those people and the many others in northern Nigeria. And of course, adding to an already very difficult situation where 15,000 people have been killed and millions displaced by Boko Haram violence in this area.
So, Deji, this ambush is clear evidence that although weakened, Boko Haram still has a presence in that region. So what are authorities there saying about that and efforts to get aid efforts back on course?
Well, the government has said it is determined to Boko Haram, remove Boko Haram completely from that region. The explanation that has been coming through is that it's not as if Boko Haram has a very strong presence, that, it's normal that you would have this kind of attack, ambush, and actually it's not the first time we'll be having this in recent time, but the military has said it is determined to protect the lives of civilians. And it's unfortunate, that, that this happened, actually. And too bad for the people, especially the IDPs now, that the UN has decided to suspend humanitarian missions now to those areas. But then the government says it will continue to provide security in that region and that civilians will be protected. And of course, I do not think that the military will also suspend patrolling those areas, no matter how dangerous they may be. And even though the UN has decided to suspend its own humanitarian mission, perhaps we might have some local, domestic support now coming from, talking about local missions now to those areas. But the Nigerian military, as I said, has said it is going to provide security for everybody who intends to go to those areas now for humanitarian services.
Lorna, how long does the UN see the suspension lasting?
Well, I've been in touch with UNICEF, which was, of course, the aid agency involved, and they've said that this is a temporary suspension. They're currently carrying out a security review, and once that is finished, they will then be in a position to decide whether or when to resume operations in the area. But, of course, given the difficulties of the situation, as I've already outlined, many people will be hoping that it is much sooner rather than later. It's worth stressing, though, it was already very difficult to find military escorts willing to take aid agencies into this area, given that it is known to be particularly dangerous. That is now going to be even harder to get protection for these humanitarian convoys, even once they do start up again. And we have seen a resurgence in recent months of attacks against civilians and aid workers, as well as security forces. And those have even been promoted, in fact, by the media outlets belonging to the so-called Islamic State, which Boko Haram has sworn allegiance to. So those attacks certainly getting more frequent. And doesn't help as well that Nigeria is fighting a separate conflict, meanwhile, against oil militants in the southern Niger Delta. So it's got a lot to cope with at the moment, and protecting these aid convoys is likely to stretch it even further. And meanwhile, the UN as well also has a difficulty with funding this aid. Stephen O'Brien, the humanitarian chief, just the other day in New York at the Security Council, said he felt like he was shouting into an empty room about the situation in Nigeria, massively underfunded. Just around 28% of the Nigerian humanitarian program is funded so far for 2016, said Stephen O'Brien. A lot more funding needed to help these people, but at the moment, even if the funding is there, the resources won't be able to get through.
All right. Lorna Shadik joining us live from Washington, and Deji Butmas live in Lagos. Thank you both for joining us.